Dear ladies and gentlemen, we have a special guest in our symposium today. He's probably one of the best-known American philosophers whose numerous books and publications have had a major influence on contemporary philosophy of mind for over 50 years. He can probably be described as one of the most important representatives of naturalism and materialism, and it's a great honor and pleasure for us to introduce you, Professor Daniel C. Dennett. Hello, Mr. Professor.
Hello. Good to talk with you.
Thank you very much that you've made our investigation to our interview make it right. So I want to choose just a little bit, Dennett, for the guests who don't know him. I don't think that there are anyone else out there. Dennett graduated in 1959 and made his Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy at Harvard University in 1963. There he was a student of Quine. And in 1965, he received his Doctor of Philosophy at the University of Oxford, where he studied under Gilbert Ryle, and he was a member of Hertford College. His dissertation was entitled The Mind and the Brain, Introspective Description in the Light of Neurological Findings, intentionally, though it's our interest topics in this. Dennett taught at the University of California, Irvine, and 1965 to 1971, before moving to Tufts University near Boston, where he settled for many decades, aside from periods visiting at Harvard University and several other schools. Now we can start with our first question, Professor Dennett.
Fine.
Okay, fine. At the beginning of our symposium interviews, we usually ask not entirely serious questions to get a somewhat relaxed introduction to the topics. So let's start with a question for you. In article Brainstorms, Philosophical Essays on Mind and Psychology from 1981, you once wrote the following: "The model of decision-making I'm proposing has the following feature. When we are faced with an important decision, a consideration generator whose output is to some degree underdetermined produce a series of considerations, some of which may of course be immediately rejected as irrelevant by the agent, consciously or unconsciously. What consideration did your consideration generator produce when you received our invitation to the interview?"
Yes. First, let me say the indeterminism that I speak of there, it doesn't have to be quantum indeterminism. It's just chaos. It's deterministic chaos. It's unpredictable. It's like rolling dice or flipping a coin. And the considerations that occurred to me were just, how many interviews have I given? And does this look like an interesting one? And I decided it's one more country, so yes, I'll go ahead and do this one. I've turned down dozens of interview requests in the last month or two, but I decided to do this one. No very pressing, principled reason.
Okay.
So I acted of my own free will. Nobody forced me.
Okay, so it's a lucky dice for us. What is your free will, or didn't you mentioned before, or neither accept the invitation? You mentioned you are you're not interested in determinism.
Yeah, free will doesn't require indeterminism. It just requires that we be self-controlled agents, and to be a self-controlled agent, you have to have your degrees of freedom under the control of yourself. We all know about remote control, about drones and things like that. And you don't want to be a puppet or a drone. You want to be a self-controller. You want to have your decision-making, your controller on board. And in order to do that, you have to keep your decision-making to some degree private and secret. That's all free will is. It's the capacity to decide on your own information and desires and beliefs what you want to do, and not be anybody's puppet. That's what free will is. Has nothing to do with physical determinism.
Okay, could you call it a semi-compatibilism, or is it a pure compatibilism?
It's compatibilism, sure.
Okay. So you think our brain has made the map for our lives? So the proposals which gets to us are a matter of the things which we are given by the evolution. Is it right?
Well, thanks to evolution, we have brains that are constantly sampling the environment, sampling our experience, and producing anticipations for the future. And we have, through culture, through science, through learning, through language, we've amplified that capacity to a very great degree. It doesn't have to be undetermined. It just has to be wide open, creative. And we're capable of indefinite levels of reflection and reconsideration. And it's our capacity to be moved by reasons represented to us that matters. The fact that determinism is true or might be true is no hindrance to that at all.
It's more our experience which we have made in our life, which made our decisions.
Yes, and some people, of course, are very unfortunate. They have lives that are blighted in one way or another. That they have brain damage, or they have a terrible, terrible youth, or they fall into terrible company, and then they have diminished responsibility and diminished free will because they're not competent. They're not morally competent deciders, but most people are morally competent deciders.
Actually, we want to ask a question too.
You published a lot of books, Professor Dennett. One well-known is From Bacteria to Bach and Beck, The Evolution of Minds. And the latest book, I think, is I've Been Thinking, Adventures on Philosophy. Your approach to explaining consciousness can be described as naturalism and materialism. Can you explain a little the main concept of your idea of how consciousness is coming up?
I think one of the big problems that science faces now is that consciousness is the last really big, serious problem that we don't have a very good handle on. And a lot of people for millennia have wanted to make this into a mystery. They want to make consciousness sort of magic, but we have not come close to exhausting the science of consciousness as one more natural phenomenon, like birth and death and growth and self-repair, life itself. We are a product of evolution of several different varieties, and the insights that we gather every day about how the mind works, how the brain works, are showing that all the so-called magic of consciousness is actually a kind of, it's more like stage magic, it's more like conjuring. These are tricks that have evolved to help us through life, and we are blessed, thanks to these evolutionary processes, with a wonderful control system. And that's what consciousness is. It's the control system that governs our lives.
You said, I wrote it down, a very interesting sentence in another interview. Consciousness is the brain's user illusion of itself. For me, it's an interesting explanation. I'm not 100% sure if I understand it, but it sounds to me it could be a little bit also a mystic.
No, not at all. Not at all. We can sneak up on it and see that it's not mysterious. Let's take your mobile, your cell phone, your smartphone. It has lots of apps on it. Those are user illusions. Those are virtual machines. You move them around. The whole user interface has been brilliantly designed to make it easy for you. You don't want to know the complexities going on inside your cell phone. So you have this simplified, metaphorical, and to some degree distorted presentation that you use as the interface that you deal with. All right, now, all we have to do now is realize that your brain is your control system, but it has the same problem. The brain is much too complicated for the brain to make sense of on its own. So nature has provided it with metaphors and oversimplifications and throwing away a lot of information, hiding a lot of work, so that we have just a very limited amount of content that is usable, accessible, rememberable, reportable. That's what consciousness is. It's the limited and not infallible representation of what's going on in our own brains when we try to control ourselves.
So staying in this image, how do we have to imagine? It's like a computer that is using itself. So when I was reading this idea, I had the image of an arm that was growing out of a computer and going to the screen and to the to the mouse to put something in itself. Is this a good?
But now we can simplify that.
Yeah.
First of all, you don't have any eyes inside your brain, so remove all the colors from the screen. Now you don't have an arm, so remove the hand, but just move the whole thing inside. Now you have brain events that respond to brain events, but the system, the patterns, the real patterns that make it possible for your brain to be so robust and versatile are in the regularities that have been trained up by evolution in your brain. So that let's take a very simple example that's been famous for over half a century, what the frog's eye tells the frog's brain, a famous paper by Letvin, Maturana, McCulloch, and Pitts back in about 1950. The frog's eye has information about little moving dark things in the world, and these trigger the tongue motions that capture these flies. This is a very simplified picture of the world. The frog doesn't need elaborate information. It just needs to have a system that will grab that fly with its sticky tongue. That's the frog's part of the frog's user illusion. And it's just that we have many, many more of them. Color itself is a user illusion. Atoms aren't colored. We've known for hundreds of years that atoms aren't colored. We have a good theory of color now about electromagnetic radiation and reflection, and the theory of color has had some wonderful developments in the last 50 years. But don't make the mistake of reinserting the colors in your head. No, they don't have to be in the head because there's no eyes with color vision in there to look at them. You have to break away from the presentation and go to the consumption of the representations. And since the consumers are themselves brain processes, not eyes, not ears, not noses, since you don't have any ears inside your head, when you hum a tune to yourself, you don't have to strike up the band. There's no sound in your head, but there's representation of sound. It's just in another medium. It's more like the medium of, say, a CD. It's a coding which is like the digital coding of a CD. It's not digital, probably not digital, but it's equally, it's not acoustic either.
Yeah.
I want to make you a compliment for your lifetime because I think you have a great influence on the philosophy of mind because of your naturalistic approach. Because before there's always times the armchair's philosophy or the googly goop to think about the things, and they have no proof of it. So your scientific turn is for me totally right. It's the only way to get to a game of this. There I completely agree with you, but I have always the problems with this kind of things when you say there have to be representations of the world, because you say that our brain has to make a representation from the outer world. Okay, no problem. Could we only reduce it to the process of himself, like a physiological process, that they say the color is the content, not we only search always the content in the brain. Do you know what I want to?
In the end, there's just physical processes going on in your brain. There's spike trains and neurons interacting with each other, and it's immensely complicated, but there's no color in there because it's dark.
Yeah, okay.
So the representation of color in your brain, or the representation of sound in your brain, is in the medium of spike trains. And we know something about that. The trick is you just have to get used to a new way of thinking about representation. John Maynard Keynes was once asked, did he think in words or pictures? And he said, I think in thoughts. But he didn't say what thoughts were. And he was right. They aren't words and they aren't pictures, but they're like words and pictures in that they have representational content. And we find the public world of pictures and written words and spoken words so easy to think about that we fall back on those ideas to think about the representations in our head. One of the great gifts of computer science is to show us that there's other ways of thinking about representation, and more than just computers too. But computers give us many examples that show that it's quite possible to have very deep and very high fidelity and very detailed representations that are not pictures, that are not, they're bit strings, and arrays and the like are wonderful representations that can be used. Representations are no good unless there's a representation user, but that's the other side of the picture, and that's one that philosophers and neuroscientists often forget. They say there's representation here in the brain, but then they don't ask how the user uses that representation.
I give you absolutely right. We have an interview before, perhaps John Dylan Haynes. He's from the charity in Berlin, and he gets some research on it. He makes some brain decoding, he called it. Not brain reading, it's not so good. He mentioned he wants to explain the brain decoding because of the spike trains which are mapped, and he is also in the possibility to get from a person under fMRI of which he's thinking, but after a little bit big data. It's of course so it works. No problem. But the question is more the pictures or the color is not the problem, but the eye is the problem, not the color. But you say eye is an illusion. Okay.
The eye is also part of the user illusion.
Okay.
It's the center of narrative gravity. It's an abstraction, and it works wonderfully. It's the author of your speech acts. It's the decider of your decisions. It's the lover of those you love, but it's not a little homunculus in there.
No.
It's a consortium, a somewhat combative, somewhat competitive consortium of elements that are themselves agents with agendas. And our knowledge of ourselves is itself somewhat limited and metaphorical.
Your position is also your is called also a qualia difficult word. We had it. Very difficult. Qualia eliminativism.
You get it.
Innate qualia. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
And we wanted to ask you the idea of qualia. Is there a possible empirical test that we could make to see if there's qualia or not? Because
that's an interesting question. First of all, qualia is a philosopher's term of art, and you might say it's a technical term, but it's just comical how much disagreement there is among philosophers about what qualia are. And I've pointed out that I've shown some examples of stimuli where there's a major change in the stimulus that occurs several times a second. And people don't see the change for a long time. And I ask them, yes, but were your qualia changing for that patch of white or brown? And it was changed, the light entering your eyes was changing. Were your qualia changing? And to my delight, the audience is divided. Some say yes, some say no. They don't even agree. They're all having the same experience. They don't know how to describe it. The whole notion of qualia is incoherent. So there doesn't have to be an experiment. If you ask a physicist, what experiment shows that Aristotle was wrong with his laws of motion? We're way beyond that. Newton was already beyond Aristotle with his laws of motion. And similarly, the very idea of qualia is an embarrassment. It's a reproduction of a bad idea. It's putting an intrinsic property in a place where an intrinsic property would be of no use. So it's like absolute rest or something like that. It's just a bad idea. So does that mean there's no such thing as color? No, it just means that color isn't what you think it is. It's not qualia. And
you're also talking about the inner film with the movie.
There isn't one. That's
So you would.
That's the big mistake.
The existence of our inner movie that we see. So, but what do we see? I think many people have the impressions that they have this movie.
They sure do.
Yeah.
So, and we have to explain those beliefs, those impressions, but we don't explain it by saying there actually is a movie going on in the Cartesian theater. No, there isn't. There's the consumption of representations and the laying down of memories and the production of candidate speech acts, and all of that happens without any inner movie. You just, it's amazing to me. I went to so much trouble to destroy the Cartesian theater, and people keep coming back to it, and they think, but there has to be one. No, there doesn't. And anybody who thinks there does is just making a major mistake.
But maybe it's a stupid question, but what is about our dreams when we dream? It's like a movie or not?
Sure, it's like a movie, and so is a novel sitting on a shelf like a movie. Our dreams are narratives with details, and sometimes we can recall them and report them in the morning, but the making of the narrative does not require any light, any color, any sound. It requires the representation of light, color, and sound, but not in a special place.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Dirk.
Yeah. I have perhaps also a little bit stupid suggestion. When we have an experiment which gets us in the position that we prove the nestedness of our consciousness or qualia in the environment, perhaps in some concrete thing, the spatial temporal theory, perhaps. When you make research on it with problems in the fMRI, you search for the synchronization of the problems with the persons which are in the experiment, if they have a synchronization with their environment. Perhaps they look at film, okay, and when you see that there is a synchronization, is it perhaps a proof, or isn't it a proof for getting some kind of qualia, or what you want to describe it?
Well, some of the people who work with fMRI have got these trainable neural nets that pull out patterns from the brain events, which they then metaphorically represent with colors on a computer screen and with shapes. That's where, but they're not copying a representation in the brain. They're doing that's like playing a CD or a DVD. Don't make the mistake of thinking that the images that you see on your video screen are actually in color on the DVD. There's just directions for how to make them. Well, so some people working with fMRIs are working on decoding some of the information in the neural signals that are in effect directions for making a representation of the content. But the representation that they then show us and we look at with our eyes, that's a metaphor. That itself is a user illusion. It's a representation of the results of their really incredibly sophisticated data analysis.
Mm-hmm. But if you can measure the cross coupling of the frequency, it's not a proof of it.
Proof of what?
A proof that the person is synchronized with his environment.
Oh, I'm not even sure what that means.
I want to. Sorry.
This person saw, recognized, noticed some event in the world, and we can prove that using, say, fMRI. Sure. But it doesn't prove that they have qualia. It just proves that they notice something. Yes. We may be able to read minds one of these days, one of these years, to some degree. And if so, then we would probably all want to stay out of the fMRI machines, because we don't want to give up that privacy. What the reading will be a decoding of representational systems that are no more colorful or acoustic than the dots on a DVD.
Okay. Another question, or Axel?
I want to do one more question about the meme concept. because you justify a lot of things with a theory of evolution, and the meme concept is an application of this evolutionary concept on patterns of information called memes. Is this a concept to explain the cultural evolution? And another question, as far as I know, the empirical proofs for the existence of memes up to now are very poor. Do you still think about this theory that it's a good one?
Oh, absolutely. And I think you're just wrong about the evidence for it. The best example of memes are words. Do words exist? Tell me, do you believe that words exist?
In a certain sense, of course, yes.
Of course. So what are they made of?
Yeah, I was thinking about a proof of a representation of a word in the brain. So I think
in the brain?
Yeah.
Well, there are, of course, representations of words in your brain, but memes, words are words. They're not just representations. Representations of words are in the brain, but words are in books and in acoustic waves and on neon signs and all sorts of other places. There's trillions of words in the world. They're perfectly real, and they evolve. They evolve by natural selection the same way genes do.
Okay.
And yes, in fact the development of evolutionary theories of cultural change is growing. We have a lot of good research going on now, and evolution of language is a particularly fruitful area right now. And many people were repelled by the idea of memes, but they're beginning to see that, first of all, a point that Dawkins made when he introduced the concept, something doesn't have to be alive to evolve. Yeah. Consider viruses. Viruses aren't alive. They're just macromolecules. They're not alive. Do they evolve? Oh, they certainly do. If there's one obvious truth demonstrated by science in the last decade, it's that viruses evolve. Well, words evolve too, and so do other memes. Habits, styles, fashions, ways of making things, and sometimes people play a big role. Sometimes they coin words, sometimes they invent new tools, but much of the creative work of culture was not the work of any individual intelligent designers, but evolved by natural selection.
Well, would you say that we can say that what we have as thoughts, what we feel as thoughts, is not something that we do, but what is done by the competition of means in our brain? Or is this this be a good formulation?
Well, yes, part of the fragmentation of the Cartesian theater is getting rid of the wise, all-knowing ego, the self that authors the words. How do you speak? How do you decide what to say next? There's a competition going on in your brain right now, and the next words you say will be uttered after you have decided to accept some version. You may not be entirely happy with it, but out it'll come from your mouth. And that's something you said. And it's in competition with other things you might have said. And you may decide as you speak the words, oh, no, this isn't really what I mean. And then you may go back and try to change it. There's this competitive process going on all the time. And a lot of it is completely unconscious. You have no privileged access to all of the churning of competition of words in your head right now. Who knows what amusing or ugly or embarrassing phrases and words are being beaten by the competition in your head right now. And if you perhaps have a few drinks, you may start saying some of those things and regret it later.
Why in evolution came up this feeling that I'm the one who decides my next word? This feeling of having decided what I said must have been some advantage in evolution, no? If it came up.
Oh yes, it's the that's the fundamental problem of control. What to do next, and so we each of us, as Kant says, acts under the idea of freedom. We have the idea that there is a single I, an author, an agent, an ego, that is the source of speech acts, the utterer of speech acts, and the decider. And it's part of the user illusion.
And what is the...
when I say it's a user illusion,
yeah,
I don't mean that's a bad thing. We are the beneficiaries of that. Now, sometimes people get their brains in such a bad state that they lose that sense of self, and it becomes fragmented or multiple, or so disoriented that there's no self at all. And that's a condition which has many different variations that psychologists, psychiatrists can study, neuroscientists as well. The sense of self that we have, of an enduring, continuing self, is a benign illusion, like the user illusion on your phone. You wouldn't want it any other way.
Your doctoral supervisor at Oxford, Gilbert Ryle, has already explained Cartesian dualism as an example of a category mistake in his book, The Concept of Mind, 1949. He also uses the hypothesis at the basis of for all your theories on the formation of content producing features of consciousness. In your original dissertation, Content and Consciousness from 1965, you, for example, you divided the problem for explaining consciousness into a need for a theory of content and the theory of consciousness. Later in Consciousness Explained 1992, you attempt to summarize the separation of content and consciousness again as a unified theory. In my opinion, in your theory of consciousness, you therefore produce from a radical functionalism to teleofunctionalism, which is also goes beyond the often used computer metaphor of computationalism. Consciousness is seen here only at the user interface of a sequential virtual machine that is inefficiently implemented on the evolutionary parallel hardware of the brain. Some English words. This is not again a new form of dualism, which separates consciousness into a software and a hardware area, or into inside versus outside, even if it may run parallel. Do you think?
Of course, in a way, it's a form of dualism. The software-hardware distinction is a form of dualism, but it's a metaphysically benign dualism. It's not a dualism of substance. We have physics, and we need the concept of information. You can't have physics without information. So, what is information? It doesn't have mass. It is one of the fundamental features of the universe. And there's a dualism, if you like. There's matter and energy, there's energy, matter, and there's information. And if you want to call that a sort of dualism, it's a great improvement over the old-fashioned kind of dualism.
Okay, it's not.
I mean, look, I know philosophers who say, I'm not sure software exists. And I say, well, do you think that Microsoft is a fraud. They don't make hardware, they make software. The man's made millions. Should we put him in jail for selling a non-existent product? I don't think so. I think it's pretty clear that software exists. And that's one of the great benefits of the computer age, is that we've learned to appreciate the power and value of information and to treat it and understand. Poor Descartes, he had no way of thinking about a machine with 1 trillion moving parts. Child's play for us, child's play, thanks to computers.
Do you think you're a monomonist? A neural monomonist?
A neutral monist? No,
Yeah.
I'm a naturalist. I think philosophical isms are usually caricatures. There's a bit of truth to all of them. Rather than brand people with labels, I would rather ask them other questions. But if you want to ask me, I'll say yes and no.
Okay. But it's perhaps a category error. It's a category error to mix it.
Mix.
To mix and then the two things. Before I've mentioned your teacher Gilbert Ryle has said that Cartesian dualism isn't right. It's a separation.
But what he was right about.
Okay.
What he was right about, I put in somewhat different terms.
Okay.
The idea that intentionality, aboutness, information is some special sort of substance is a huge category mistake. It's not. And he wasn't a scientist, didn't care about science, but he had some wonderful insights about minds. There were ways of thinking about things that were mental ways of thinking about things, or as I would say, adopting the intentional stance. And that's the idea you want, and the temptation to then clothe the intentional stance with properties that don't belong. That's the mistake of dualism.
When I pointed out, you're not interested in metaphysics, you're interested in physics. Is it right?
Well, I'm interested in metaphysics to the extent that I think the way to do metaphysics is to do physics and science. That's what metaphysics has always been. It's always been fossilized science. And as we learn, as science gives us new concepts, new ways of thinking, the metaphysics changes, or should change.
Do you think we need a new metaphysic? Perhaps something like a concept fact iterativity, or something like this?
I don't know. I think that metaphysics, as it's done in professional philosophy departments these days, is usually a pretty empty subject. I think the book by Don Ross and James Ladyman, Everything Must Go, is a good antidote to metaphysics. I think, again, we're better off holding off the task of defining until we get clearer about what we're explaining.
You're interested in structural realism, or
structural realism? Yeah, I suppose so. Yes. Realism. All of these terms are crutches that can be boom crutches. They can make more trouble for you than they help. Philosophers like to set up these either or categories and force people one way or the other. Those are usually mistakes.
Is this not an energy expansionary being accepted by evolution? And what is the selective advantage of it? When you mentioned there is in the brain something like a multiple drafts model of consciousness, which parallel multi-track processes of interpretation and elaboration of sensory impression, information, and so on, is not a lot of amount of energy for this?
Oh yeah, consciousness is extremely expensive. That's the best nature could do. It's a sort of trap. Once we got language, our brains had many more degrees of freedom that had to be controlled, and this takes a lot of energy. And we have to remember that adaptive advantage also comes with disadvantage sometimes. Sometimes we get very expensive adaptations that sometimes don't pay for themselves, and species go extinct because their antlers are too huge, for instance, or their tails are too long. And the brain is a hugely expensive organ. So far, it's paid for itself pretty well. It's given us civilization. We've changed the planet, and it has led to the expansion of our species to dominate the planet. One of the most remarkable biological events in the history of life. We're now something like 97% of the terrestrial vertebrate biomass. Incredible payoff in fitness from culture, from science, from civilization. But that expense hasn't gone away, and it may in fact lead in the end to our destruction and the destruction of the life on our planet.
Do you think that our intelligence is our doom, perhaps, of the evolution?
Oh, it's very likely our doom, yes. I mean, how long are we going to survive? Maybe we'll move to other planets when we make this one uninhabitable. But I mean, nothing's eternal except the laws of physics and mathematics. So our intelligence may save us for a long time, which would be good, in my view. But we have made tools that are so powerful that we may mistakenly use them to destroy the very ground of our existence.
Okay, a German philosopher, Holmer von Ditfurth, says that the evolution cuts the maximums always. Sometimes the dinosaurs have to a lot of mass, so the evolution cut it off because it's the maximum of mass. And could we say that our intelligence is the maximum, so the evolution had to cut it off? Or is it too provocant?
Well, I'm not sure I believe that, but it's an idea worth pondering.
Okay. Okay.
I wanted to do one question before we come to the last question. If I understand well, that the amount of energy that is consumed by consciousness is worse that we have this simplification of the surface of use that you explained before. So the advantage in evolution for this high consume of energy was the simplification. Is this you could say it this way?
I think that the fact that we can control ourselves is wonderful. It's amazing, given how many degrees of freedom we have. We couldn't control ourselves this well without civilization and the help of our fellow human beings and our reliance on culture and tradition and law and folklore and all the rest. And it creates user illusions that are benign, but also to some degree misleading. And as we learn more and more, we may discover things that make life more difficult for us. We have to be careful about that.
Okay, this is an ideal for our last question. We were talking about doom already, and we wanted to ask you about the possibility of a strong general artificial intelligence. What do you think about? You said a being has intentional states in its behavior can be predicted with an intentional attitude. In this sense, humans are intentional systems, but chess computers also have this status. Well, if chess computers have it, then a strong artificial intelligence will have it as well. How far can lead us this artificial intelligence, and what are the dangers and what are the chances?
Very briefly, of course, strong artificial intelligence, AGI, is possible in principle, because after all, we're material things. We're, as I like to say, robots made of robots, made of robots, made of robots, made of robots, with no extra magic. So in principle, you could make a conscious artificial agent that was more intelligent than we are. Yes, you could. Very, very difficult. But what we've learned recently is that amazingly powerful steps in that direction are already possible. And I still think that artificial general intelligence worth trusting is not with us, and we need to view all of the products of the new AI as potentially very dangerous alien systems, which we will have a hard time controlling and a hard time trusting, and we shouldn't trust them. And we just better hope that we don't suffer you might say, a catastrophic skepticism in the face of this. The very fabric of knowledge, we may be entering a post-epistemic age, and that would be very unsettling.
We've mentioned before the problem to prove consciousness at humans. So which way we have to prove consciousness on machines? I think there's also no way. The Turing test is a little bit joke for ChatGPT. Or
there's, first of all, no clear understanding of what consciousness is.
Yeah. And
for that reason, there's no litmus test. There's no benchmark. We already have systems that do a very good job on the Turing test. And Turing, I don't think, imagined this kind of AI. He may have. He said that probably the best way to make AI is to give them a childhood and let them grow up and learn the way we do. And indeed, now we have, that's a distinct possibility right now. In the meantime, we have these disembodied systems, these as I once called them many years ago, I spoke about bedridden AI systems. They can't get out of bed. They're stuck. They're stuck in a world of words without any concrete existence. But it's amazing how far that can go. What that shows us is how much of our own understanding is like that. I mean, you could be even quite an expert on how to sail a 19th century sailboat by reading the Jack Aubrey novels, because there's a lot of information there. never having been on one, but you could still, you could be a fount of wisdom about that. So the possibilities of AI should not be underestimated.
I think also when the machines get some sensomotoric or proprioception from his outside data, so the machine could get some cybernetic second order or something like this, which is described from Van Förster in the BCL for.
Well, I don't know if I put it in those terms, but yes, embodied AI is around, is coming.
Yeah, you think so?
Yep.
Oh, okay. A little bit spooky.
A little bit dangerous, yes.
Yeah, I think also.
Well, thank you very much.
It was now a little pessimistic at the end, but there are to be benefits of the AI.
Well, I want to be I want the world to be pessimistic. I want the world to be on guard. I'm not one of those people that thinks it would be a great thing to have autonomous AGIs roaming around. I think they'd be extremely dangerous. And much lesser systems will also be extremely dangerous.
Okay, I think this is an important point now. Also
Thank you for your remarkable notice also for the AI and the risk of that. We thank you very much, Professor Dennett. It was a pleasure for us to meet you and have some questions with you. Thanks.
So